Okay, so where I find myself basically is Jhumpa Lahiri's essay about translation uh, from her book Translating Myself and Others. The essay is titled Where I Find Myself on Self Translation. So, as the title suggests, the there is an overlap in this essay of uh, text and self. Okay. Ostensibly, okay, it is evident that the essay is about translation. Okay. Now, the issue of translation in this essay, as I understand it, is extended to other things. Okay, to one, creativity, particularly to the idea of self, and to identity. Okay, uh, we when we talk about self, it's about translation. Okay, the various things that are said about translation have very profound implications for the issue of creativity, okay, for the issue of self, the issue of identity. So this is how we can approach this essay basically, because she has some very important things to say about uh, both about writing, about translation too, and about identity. Okay? Three. Okay. So we can say that the process of translation leads to many realizations for the writer, and these realizations are enumerated somewhere in the middle of this essay, okay, in the form of 12 points. I will try and discuss each one of these. So basically, the whole experience is related to translating her work Dove Me Trove, okay, which basically means where I find myself. I have already shared with you the basic, some basic facts about Jhumpa Lahiri's life. Jhumpa Lahiri, we can say, is a person with the experience of multiple cultures. Okay, she has experience of she has experience of multiple cultures because she has traversed several uh, cultural lives. Okay, and that has led to a particular kind of perspective which is quite clearly and apparently, okay, incorporated in her writings, whether it is where I find myself or it is, in other words, okay, her her work about translation, about learning Italian, which was written before this one. Okay. So, one thing is very clear that the writer takes the issue of translation very, very seriously, because translation, okay, is not only a simple mechanical process of uh, translating one a text from one language to the other. It is many more things, because it is a process of self discovery. When you learn a new language and try to write a new language, or you translate a work from one language to the other, it is not only a mechanical process of translating, because no two languages or no two cultures, this is quite clearly suggested in this essay, no two languages or no two cultures are exactly, okay, the same. Passing on from one culture to the other, or uh, or making a shift from one language to the other, is like living a new life. So this is the basic idea, and it has very serious implications, as I said, for because there is an interrogation a subversion, and also a, I will not say rejection, but there is a disagreement with the idea of the finality of self, the finality of one's identity, the essentialized identity, unchanging, absolute, uh, immutable ideas of self and identity. These all, because according to her, now according to her, a simple transition from one language to the other can mean discovering new aspects of life, not only new aspects of life, new aspects of your own self. Because writing is basically an extension of yourself, an expression of your consciousness, a, a kind of externalization of your subjectivity. So if we take writing like this, so the implications of uh, all these things that we have just discussed become very expansive. So, and you all know that Jhumpa Lahiri basically is a person who has, as I was saying, has experienced multiple cultural contexts. She basically belongs to a family of Bengali migrants to US. Uh, she's a writer of Indian origin. Okay. Specifically speaking, she is a Bengali. Okay. She lived most of her life in the US, then established herself as a writer of English, okay, produced many popular works in English like Interpreter of Melodies and Namesake. Okay. And after that, after, I should rather put it like this, that there is an overlap of involuntary and voluntary migrations in her life, because the first part of her life, okay, involves involuntary migrations as a member of a family of migrants. So she has experience of multiple cultures. She born in Indian culture, she imbibed Indian values, Indian language, Indian value systems, and then her experience in the US made her explore the life in the West. And after that, there is a very interesting turn in her life, okay, which can be explained as a voluntary migration, because somewhere in the middle of her life, after she gained a lot of popularity as a writer of English, she decided to migrate to Italy with the sole purpose of learning Italian. Okay. Okay. She uh, discontinued writing in English and started writing in Italian. Now, after writing a few works in Italian, she enters into a new realm, a new experience, that is translating her works from Italian back into English. So this is the subject of translating myself and others. Her first book, I have already shared with you, her first book in Italian, uh, titled In Other Words, okay, deals with her difficulties in learning Italian, okay, her experience with a new language and new culture, a language she thought was beautiful. And it is the beauty of Italian which attracted her to it. So let us now begin uh, with our topic today, that which is the subject of this essay from Translating Myself and Other, called Where I Find Myself. Dove Me Trovo is her work in Italian, and there are a few things which we have already discussed in our earlier lectures, that she wrote this novel, okay. Then she thought of translating it into English, okay. And uh, there were many questions in her mind about translating, because she was distancing herself from English all the time. In order to go deeper and deeper into Italian, it was like having two beings, one English and one Italian. And she had her reservations about translating her works back into English, and that is why she didn't translate, in other words, herself. She got it translated by Anne Goldstein. And there, as I was saying, there were reservations in her mind that reverting back to English would prove to be disruptive, and it would in some way affect her relationship, a developing relationship with Italian. So this essay takes us into the mind of this writer. It is a first-hand account of her experiences with translation. So in the first part of the essay, I would say it deals with the pre-translation phase, where she is thinking about translating Dove Me Trovo, because when Dove Me Trovo has already been translated into several languages, okay. But when it comes to English, it is like claiming another part of her being, another part of her identity. Okay. Whereas when this novel is translated into other languages, Jhumpa Lahiri does not feature in the process because she doesn't know those languages. But when the question of translating this work into English crops up, okay, obviously the question is whether she will translate it herself or she'll get it translated by some other person. Okay. And while talking about this phase, she says that I had gone too deep into Italian and so English no longer represented the reassuring essential act of coming up for air. Okay. So time and again there are analogies with swimming in her work, in other words also. Okay. She says that when she was at the initial stages of learning Italian, okay, she stayed close to the edges of a swimming pool. It was like swimming, and she stayed close to the edges. It didn't go into the center of the water. And only when the comfort level increased and she felt at home with Italian did she go into the. So there is a analogy comparison with swimming, and here also she draws an analogy with swimming, and she says, now I was so deep into the pool of Italian that I didn't need to come out to breathe English. So English was no more oxygen for me. And during this time, it is just a little piece of information she gives us, that she was traveling between US and Italy all the time while she was both writing Dove Me Trovo and afterwards. Now, the first thing she says is that I was not very sure about Dove Me Trovo. She says, it was my child. But the relationship was the same as that of first generation migrant parents with their second generation child. Okay. She says, my parents must have looked at me when I was growing up in the US. My parents must have looked at me as somebody strange, because you know that the children who grow up in a different country are not exactly like their parents and do not uh, adhere to the cultural practices of their native country. So their parents look at them in a very, there is an element of surprise because the children grow up differently. So she says, I also looked at my book in the same way. It was my book, but since I had learned Italian at a very late stage of my life, I was not sure about this book basically. And then she hires a translator called Frederica Randall. Okay, but Frederica Randall is important, not important because she very soon after this she decides that I will translate the work myself. Okay, and then we come to the second part of the text. Okay, but she says the translator Frederica Randall, okay, instilled confidence in me. She translated a few pages and they read the pages together. And she says, when I read the translation, I felt a little reassured and confident that my book, after all, is not bad. Okay. It can sustain itself in another language also. It can sustain itself in some other language also. So she says, Frederica Randall, the translator I had hired to translate this book, didn't translate it because somewhere in the middle, she decides that Jhumpa Lahiri decides she will translate the work. But she says Frederica's entry in my life was not useless because Frederica taught me the somersault. That this somersault could be performed, that it could be translated back into English. So I began translating in 2019 at the start of the fall semester. And she says the first thing I did was that I kept Frederica's translation of my work, the few pages she had translated, somewhere away from my sight, because I did not want to follow her model. She had played a very important role because she had proved that this book could be translated. But then everyone has a way of translating and everyone translates differently. The book consists of 46 relatively brief chapters, and she says I started translating these chapters, 2-3 chapters at one time. Then the first challenge was to find the correct translation for the title, Where I Find Myself, Dog Meat Robo. And she says, now this, from here, her insights about translation acquire a seriousness, because she says that the translation should have been Where I Find Myself. Dog Meat Robo is Where I Find Myself in English. But she says that I didn't like this translation. And then one day, suddenly, while traveling, the word whereabouts came to me. And she says that I didn't select the title. The title selected itself. Now, see, she says the title selected itself. Whereabouts was a title selected on its own. So her insights about writing and translation, I said, seem to acquire new meanings, new connotations, new significance. What does she mean when she says that the book selected her own translation? So she is somewhere, you know, detaching the process of writing from, let's say, from a set of conscious choices. She says when she had written the first draft of the translation, she's circulated the translation among her friends, but she chose only those friends who did not know Italian and could read only in English. Okay. Then the next point. This is again slightly important. She says the process involving 2 books gradually became a process involving 3 books. Why? Because now, while I was translating, okay, I went back to the original, and in revisiting the original, I found that there were some deficiencies in the original which needed to be set right. So see, a book which has already been written exposes its problems when now later on she will link it with something bigger when she says that translation is not only a mechanical and simple process of converting a book from one language to the other. No, it is, number one, revisiting your work. When you revisit your work, you rethink it. And when you rethink it, you realize that the work is not as complete and as perfect as you thought it to be. This is one. And then she says, translation is a process of reading, rereading, and then again reading your original work. And this reading and rereading again exposes the incompleteness of the original. So, coming back to my point, yes, that the process involving 2 books was gradually becoming a process involving 3 books, because now a new version of the Italian text would, even if it would involve or it would be minor revisions, okay, but nevertheless I am going to alter the original also. So, in other words, the second version of the book was now generating a revised Italian text that was stemming from my self-translation. Okay, self-translation. So, the third version was appearing, which was the result not of revision but of translation, the process of translating the book to another language. There you get the opportunity of dissecting your own work, going deeper into it. Going deeper into it, it is an opportunity to rethink, to look at your work again, and to reassess your work. So here she makes a very important point. The brutal act of translation frees oneself once and for all from the false myth of the definitive text. So she says, what does translation do to you? What does it lead to? Translation demolishes the myth of a definitive text. Definitive means final, perfect, one that has exhausted all possibilities. जिसकी सारी संभावनाएं खत्म हो गई। राइटिंग संभावनाओं को खत्म नहीं करती, राइटिंग की संभावनाएं कभी खत्म नहीं होती, और ट्रांसलेशन आपको दिखाती है कि संभावनाएं खत्म नहीं हुई। द पॉसिबिलिटीज हैव नॉट बीन एग्जॉस्टेड। It was only by self-translation that I finally understood what Paul Valery meant when he said that a work of art was never finished. You dump a work of art, you feel, when you feel okay, I have written enough. But writing, when we consider a work finished, when we consider a work finished and done with, when we consider it over, when we consider it to be a perfect specimen of a complete book, okay, we are following a flawed logic, because neither yourself nor the text can be seen as a definitive text. Now, here we can say that what Jhumpa Lahiri means is that she, by translating herself, by experiencing different cultures and different languages, she has been rewriting herself also. She has been exploring the possibilities of life, new possibilities of life. Okay? She has been passing through repeated processes of self discovery. वो जितनी भाषाओं में, जितने कल्चर्स में जा रही है, अपनी पर्सनैलिटी के, अपनी कॉन्शियसनेस के, अपने सेल्फ के, अपनी आइडेंटिटी के, उतने ही वो जो फैसेट्स हैं. So somewhere you have to link it with her experience of migrations. She is just as her books are translated books, she is also a translated and retranslated person. Okay, so every work, she says, is a work in progress. No work is complete. No human being is a definitive text. If we consider ourselves to be definitive texts, we are foreclosing the possibilities of life. The self-discovery and self-translation continues throughout life. But the important thing is to introspect on the experiences of life. And this ways the translation of her book was done. Now, I will just read 2-3 lines before I come to what I said is a list of her insights. You can call them insights, you can call them realizations, you can call them whatever you want. But they are given point by point. There are 12 points. But before that, there are 2-3 things. One, the translator side of me focused on bringing the book into English was already subconsciously distancing and dissociating from the Italian. Now, this is what she says, that there must be a separation between the original. The original and the translation are both linked and separated. Because they are linked because one is the source of the other. They are separated because they have their own lives. When you translate a book out of a language and into the other language, you then cannot say that it is the same book. It is a new book. So a true separation, as false as that is, must occur. In the final stages of reviewing a translation, either of one's own work or someone else's, one achieves a level of concentration that is akin to focusing purely on the quality and sensations of. So she says it is like when you're translating, it is like swimming in the sea and being conscious, only conscious of the keen sensation of water on your skin. You don't notice anything that is floating on the water around you. So this she describes as separation and selective blindness. Now, let's come to there is a list of insights which come to her after passing through the process of translation. 1. Translation. Now you can apply this to the text and to herself, both. Translation leads to a heightened sense of existence, a heightened sense of, the consciousness of reality. It leads to an intensity of perspective. Translation leads to an intensity of perspective. Then, second, is translation needs courage. It needs uh, courage to leave the security of the familiar and the audacity to enter the territory of the unfamiliar. Because every writer is complacent about his or her book because it has been written, it has been sold, it is lying on the shelves. So you can be complacent while thinking, okay, my book is popular. But it needs courage to go back, revisit, rethink, reread, translate, and find that the book is incomplete in many senses. So it gives one, it is a transition from complacency, being complacent, to something opposite. It is the end of certitudes and certainties related with your life, with your identity, with your book, with your work, with the idea of creativity. Self-translation is a bewildering, paradoxical, going backward and moving forward at once. There is ongoing tension between the impulse to plow ahead, undermined by a strange gravitational force that holds you back. Okay, so she says, it is a state of in-betweenness also, because you are moving back and forth. Okay, there is gravitation which pulls you, and there is energy, tension, a new impulse which takes you ahead. Then, self-translation means prolonging. This is it's a brilliant observation. He says, self-translation means prolonging your relationship with the text. It is like stretching it further, giving the book a new life. He says, it is as if you expect the day would come to an end and it would be dark, but the sun is still shining. So you give your work a new lease of life. by translating it. I suppose the exhilarating aspect of translating myself was being constantly reminded as I changed the words from one language to that I myself had changed so profoundly that I was capable of such change. And finally, something I was suggesting, alluding to, okay, that while you are translating the text, you are also translating yourself, your ideas about life, your understanding of life, your perspective about life. Everything changes. And that is why she said that it gives a new intensity to your perspective about life, about yourself, about your identity. It is not translation, it is self translation. Whereabouts will never be an autonomous text in my mind, nor will the paperback or so and so, then I skip a few lines. They are conjoined twins, though on the surface they bear no resemblance to one another. So my two books are like twins, but they do not look the same. They have nourished and been nourished by the other. Once the translation was in progress, I almost felt like a passive bystander as they began sharing and exchanging elements between themselves. So, in one sense, I was a mere facilitator. The book translated itself. The book translated itself. Okay. So, you are not as a writer and as a translator. You are not a, I should say, a subject, an authority. Okay. To a certain extent, language is autonomous. There is a give and take between cultural influences and your life. One does not come before the other, and the other does not come after the first. Okay, so this is it. These were the insights, okay, with which, and there is again a section after this, okay, about which I should say that बेटे बंद कर